Tim Walz continues to be criticized for embellishing his rank in service. After it came out over the weekend, he once claimed to be an official bikini inspector. Walz's direct superior in the National Guard says Walz knew his unit was about to deploy to Iraq and went behind the back of his superior officer to resign. When reached for comment, Walz yelled, "Hey, look over there!" and then ran.
So let me tell you what just went down. Gutfeld totally roasted Tim Walz like he was nothing. He called out every dumb move, every fake act, and showed how Minnesota turned into a full-on disaster thanks to him. And if you ever thought Tim was just another boring governor, think again. This roast showed how bad he messed things up, and Gutfeld didn't hold anything back. He spilled it all like he was done staying quiet.
Gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, is our strength our diversity?
Our strength is our diversity.
You won't believe how bad things look when Tim Walz tries to run Minnesota like he's in charge. But actually, he's just lost acting smart with nothing to show. And then Gutfeld jumps in with jokes and truth showing how everything's falling apart and turning the state into a mess that feels like California. But even worse.
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face. You know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird?
So here's the thing. Tim Walz acts like he's leading, but really he just avoids making choices and passes stuff off to other people. Or some dude named Kyle in a fancy vest, and Gutfeld totally clowned him, saying he's the kind of guy who waits till everything's wrecked before even trying to fix it.
Now, Walz is weird, but he disguises it under the costume of phony compassion, a fake politician who masks destructive ideas under the guise of empathy. At a 2017 town hall, he implied 10-year-old boys should be able to invade girls' bathrooms because it's all about safety. Quote, "As a teacher, my #1 responsibility in the classroom is the safety, security, and belongingness of every single child."
When the city was going wild in 2020 and fires were lighting up the streets, Tim Walz acted all confused, like he didn't know what to do. Gutfeld showed how he just stood there looking lost, like he needed CNN to tell him what to say before even reacting.
This is a guy who says that he stands for public safety, but actively encouraged the rioters who burned down Minneapolis.
And that is a claim the Republican ticket is trying to hammer home about Governor Tim Walz. He is to blame for Minneapolis burning in 2020.
Is any of that true? David Schumann has new reporting tonight about what exactly Governor Walz did during those fateful few days.
Unfortunately, Memorial Day evening in Minneapolis was anything but peaceful, and neither was last night. Minneapolis and St. Paul are on fire. The fires still smolder in our streets.
Gutfeld roasted Tim Walz for doing nothing during the riots while people were trying to save their shops. Tim was busy writing some soft speech, and Gutfeld joked that the only thing he shut down was common sense, and the National Guard showed up so late it felt like they took a ride share to get there.
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, "You damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them."
So, wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough?
Things got real messy when crime went up, and instead of fixing it, Tim Walz acted like people were just imagining stuff. Gutfeld didn't let that slide. He joked how carjackings turned into a sport and buying cereal felt like a mission with a bodyguard. And while folks were scared, Tim stayed all chill like he was watching a nature show. And when it came to the police, he tried to play both sides and ended up making it worse, and his rules were all over the place, like you could drink but not pray. And Gutfeld said dealing with his orders felt like throwing darts blindfolded in total darkness.
We're here today because an unspeakable tragedy has unfolded in Minnesota. My good friend and colleague, Speaker Melissa and her husband Mark, were shot and killed early this morning in what appears to be a politically motivated assassination. Our state lost a great leader, and I lost the dearest of friends. My prayers also go out to State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette, who were each shot multiple times. The Hoffmans are out of surgery at this time and receiving care, and we are cautiously optimistic they will survive this assassination attempt. This was an act of targeted political violence. Peaceful discourse is the foundation of our democracy. We don't settle our differences with violence or at gunpoint.
When lockdowns hit, Tim Walz made life super hard for small shops, while giant stores kept making tons of money. Gutfeld said, "If you were a big rich company, you were essential, but if you were just trying to survive, then too bad." And those little stores got crushed, while places like Amazon made enough to buy the world. The double standard was so bad it felt like you could skate on it, and knowing Minnesota, someone probably did. And when it comes to schools, Tim acts like he's fixing things by giving money to people in charge, but students keep falling behind and test scores dropped like his ratings. And now classes are more about weird charts and unicorn lessons than actual learning, like math got pushed way to the back.
Hack at Politico writes this piece on the body language from the debate, claiming that it speaks volumes. Yeah, it says that Walz lost, but one of them at Politico says it's like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is his wide eyes. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that?
So here's where it gets even worse. Gutfeld says students in Minnesota are leaving school barely able to think, like toast-level thinking. And instead of fixing it, Tim Walz keeps wasting money on stuff that sounds made up, and when it comes to taxes, he just keeps raising them like it's some kind of prize. And Gutfeld joked, Tim treats tax hikes like giveaways and handles state money like a kid with a new card buying dreams that make no sense, and building offices just to push papers around. And even with a calculator and a time machine, Gutfeld says Tim still couldn't figure out how to balance anything.
But whose expertise does he rely upon for his Midwestern takes? Here's Minnesota State Rep Leigh Finke, who wants to train more children's doctors on sex change surgery and puberty blockers. He sponsored the Trans Refuge Bill, which Walz signed, which makes Minnesota a sanctuary state for such butchery.
So now Tim Walz is out here acting like a climate hero, while Gutfeld just laughs and shows how all that green stuff ended up being a waste with huge spending and no real results, and the power still goes out if it snows too much, and those train projects cost a fortune but barely help anyone. And instead of real fixes, Tim hands out flyers, holds boring meetings, and acts like that's enough while nothing actually gets better.
Also seem to doubt the validity of the last election and future ones.
They've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada that show some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah, this one's a quote. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so?
So Tim Walz loves throwing around big words like equity and healing and all that stuff like he's got a list he checks off every time he talks, and Gutfeld joked that listening to him is like watching someone toss alphabet soup at a wall and pretend it means something. And even with all that talking, there's still no real change. You can't fix streets with hashtags, and Tim gives speeches like a school principal trying way too hard to sound cool with weird hand moves and confusing talk. And then he tried to ride the whole social justice wave but ended up tripping over his own rules, and Gutfeld said he tries so hard to please everybody that he ends up fixing nothing. And now businesses are running away, and he treats any chance to grow the economy like it's a bad idea and just adds more rules to slow everything down.
He exploited his military background to cover up his crime. He said it was related to his service and that he actually wasn't drunk. He just misheard the instructions in the drunk test. He blew a super high level. It was like, 0.2, driving 100 miles an hour. And then when he's running for office, he said that he wasn't drunk. I mean, this guy has creep written all over it. He created a snitch line, but lies about his personal infractions. He doesn't even own up to it. This is a guy who pushes a hoax about a sex on a couch. And then the closer you look at him, he's a creepy
So Gutfeld jokes that business owners are packing up and heading to South Dakota where they probably get welcome baskets that say, "Hey, at least we like you," and farmers in Minnesota are drowning in so much red tape they can't breathe, while Tim Walz offers them fancy talk about community engagement, which really means nothing, and Gutfeld says this guy could literally watch crops die and still blame it on something made up like carbon privilege. And then he goes around bragging about tech stuff that barely works, acting like he invented Wi-Fi while the state lags behind, and he treats small towns like they only matter if they vote the way he wants, and the wild part is, he still acts like Minnesota is some perfect example of success, even though the numbers say otherwise, and Gutfeld says the only thing that shines in Minnesota now is the nonsense they send to DC and late night shows, and Tim runs things with the confidence of someone who's never had to live under his own rules, and that's the real joke, and just when you think he's done messing things up, he throws money at new task forces to study the exact problems he helped make, like hiring someone to solve your mess, then demanding they paint a mural about how great you are and all, while Minneapolis looks like a movie set for total chaos, and the only thing working regularly is the spray paint on walls.
Since his only attack was that the other guy was weird. Because everyone is weird, the more you get to know them. It's why marriage is a commitment. Over time, both spouses realize we're all bat crazy. But there's weird and there's dangerously insane.
So here's the truth. Tim Walz doesn't even need anyone to roast him because he's already doing that job himself with how he runs the whole state. Like, he makes moves that don't help anyone, and Gutfeld doesn't even have to try hard to make fun of it. Like during the pandemic, Tim only cared about science if it agreed with whatever he had planned to say in his next press conference, and when schools were falling apart and test scores were crashing hard, instead of actually helping kids learn, he started pushing stuff like equity lounges, like that's gonna help anybody read better. And Gutfeld says the most hilarious part is when Tim starts talking about how great the economy is doing while in real life, businesses are shutting down left and right, like a hurricane is about to hit, and even though people are leaving Minnesota like it's on fire, Tim still calls that a success, like he's proud. Folks are running away, and that right there shows how far off he is from reality, because only a politician would think losing your own people means you're doing something right. And Gutfeld says when a guy runs a state like it's some low-budget play filled with confusion and chaos, you don't just whisper and hope it gets better, you hit back with all the truth and all the jokes, and the way things are going, this roast is just getting started and it's only going to get hotter from here. If you want more wild truth and no sugarcoating, then hit that follow button on 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐿 Reports, because we're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.